again. This is the 20th of July 2021, and this is another Aughty Thoughty, me and my spin. This one is on pregnancy and the general reproductive and menstrual process. As you can imagine, there will be lots of mentions of the downstairsy bits. So if you're not into that kind of thing, yeah, you might want to give this one a miss. And no sniggering, please. It's very serious, very fascinating and beautiful story of how we came to be. First of all, I will just say, I think it always puzzles me why, we don't talk about these things more often, especially the menstrual cycle and the female reproductive system, the uterus and the ovaries and the fallopian tubes. There's things that I'm still learning now, like I'm a mum, well into adulthood. And there's things that I don't know about my own body. I think the education system misses a lot out. I mean, at school we were told, we had some sex education. We learnt about how penises and vaginas work in biology classes and everything, but we missed out so much. The things that I had no idea about at all. Probably the bulk of what I know about the reproductive process happened when I was 29 and decided I wanted to have my own child. I had no idea when ovulation happened, or really what estrogen and progesterone did, or why you feel different ways throughout your cycle, or anything like that. And yes, as I say, there are still things that I'm learning. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a gynaecologist. I'm passing on things that I have learned for the benefit of anyone else who might be interested in these things, and also because I want to talk about it. As I say, it is something of a special interest. This is not official medical advice. This is just me talking about things that I happen to know. I can't promise that I haven't been sort of misinformed, or that I haven't sort of got things muddled up, but I will do my best to be factual. First of all, the menstrual cycle. I'll talk about what the menstrual cycle is. We all know that, some blood comes out about once a month. And then in between there's this sort of mysterious period of no blood, so what's going on? Is nothing happening? Who knows? The menstrual cycle, it's counted from the first day of bleeding. The day the bleeding starts is the first day of your cycle, and it goes on until the last day of no blood. For most women, most of the time, this is about, more or less, give or take, 28 days, which is why we talk about it in terms of months, the time of month, once a month, monthlies, that kind of thing. The blood is the womb lining shedding itself because you are not pregnant. This takes depends a lot from woman to woman. It can vary hugely. It might take 3 days, it might take 2 weeks. It's generally more or less 5 or 6 days. And then after the bleeding stops, the ovaries get ready to release an egg, an ovum, to give it its technical name. Ovums, it's a single cell. It's just about visible. It's like a little speck of dust. You are born with all the ova you will ever have. You know, they develop inside you when you develop in your mother's uterus. You know, they're there when you're born. And then when you are, you know, maybe 12, 13-ish, again, give or take, it's all an organic process. It's all down to hormones and body size. Happens. There's a big range. You know, some girls start at 9, some at 16. You know, it can be can be an even bigger range than that, really, and you know, be perfectly natural. But yeah, generally around 12, 13-ish, the eggs begin to pop out of the ovaries. They're made of, you know, each one is in a little sac called a follicle. And in the middle of the cycle, you know, in an average 28-day cycle, it would be on day 14 or thereabouts. The follicle opens up and the egg comes out, and it goes down the fallopian tubes. The fallopian tube, it kind of had little fingers. It's not connected to the ovary, as I always thought it was. Imagine the ovary's here. Here's the fallopian tube. It's like a long corridor that leads down into the uterus. It's just open-ended. It just sort of opens up into, you know, the inside of your body. And as the follicle begins to open for the egg to come out, the little fingers on the end of the fallopian tubes reach for it and scoop it up. Travels down the fallopian tube. It's often depicted in diagrams as rolling down. I don't think it necessarily rolls as such. Don't know if it's affected by gravity in that way, or if the fallopian tube is dry enough for it to roll down. But it moves down towards the uterus. If on the way it encounters a sperm, and the sperm burrows its way into the middle of the egg and fertilises it, then you know, it begins to develop into a person. If not, I'll get back to that later. If not, it continues its journey down the fallopian tube into the uterus, and it disintegrates. It'll just come out, you know, with the blood and everything, you know, the little pieces of it, and you'll flush it away down the toilet. And it's all down to hormonal fluctuations. The little follicle that the egg comes out of, that becomes known as a corpus luteum once it's empty, and that starts to produce the hormones that are necessary for the first stages of pregnancy. And after that dies away, after 2 or 3 months, the placenta takes over. Right. If the egg meets sperm, begins to divide into 2 and 4. If at this point it splits into 2 separate eggs, you get twins. And it develops into 2 and 4 and 8 and 6. And it takes a few days, you know, 3, 4, 5 days, to get down into the uterus, and it implants in the uterine wall. There's a hormone called progesterone, which it spikes after ovulation happens, and that it makes the uterine wall thicker and develops lots of blood vessels. So it's, you know, nice and soft and moist for the egg to implant into, and it buries itself in the uterine wall like that, and there it begins to develop into an embryo. At that point, it's called a blastocyst. If the egg isn't fertilised, or if for whatever reason it doesn't manage to implant, as sometimes happens, the progesterone will sort of reach a peak around the 3rd week and then gradually fall. And that is when the uterine lining is not supported anymore, and it begins to disintegrate and fall out, and you have another period and another cycle begins. The estrogen is another big player in the menstrual cycle. It's produced by the ovaries. Again, it peaks just after the period. It begins to rise, peaks around the time of ovulation, and that is that's what produces the ovulation reaction. There's also follicle stimulating hormone, FSH, as it is affectionately known, and that again it spikes around the time of ovulation, and it's just about, as its name suggests, stimulating the follicle to open up and release the egg. I'll talk for a moment about sperm, because they're quite interesting. Not quite as interesting as they're often made out to be, I think. In little cartoons, they've depicted almost as little creatures, aren't they, with eyes and faces and sort of swimming around like little fish or something. They're not. They're again, single cells. They're fairly dull in themselves. I mean, the only vaguely interesting thing about them is that they have a wiggly tail on them that allows them to move around. They aren't consciously swimming towards the egg. They've got wiggly tails that mean they move about. That's their existence. They're produced in their millions by the testicles. It's those little dangly bits behind the penis, They've got little hard blobs in them. They're the testicles. They're just little glands that produce sperm, and the sperm swim up a little tube called the epididymis. Oh, they don't swim up it. No, they're sort of flushed along it by semen, which is just a fluid, and along the urethra, which is the tube that the man pees down. Pop out the end, and if it happens to be, in the region of a vagina or something, somewhere around the vagina maybe, some sperm could get in. Ultimately, if there's one sperm in the female reproductive tract when the egg is there is a vague chance she might get pregnant. If there's millions and millions of sperm, then there's quite a strong chance she will get pregnant. Ultimately, it's all down to probability. And individual people, there's a lot of variables there. Individual people can have many different factors at play in their bodies that affect their fertility and affects the chances of fertilising an egg at any given cycle. Cervixes are interesting. I've only very recently learned that a cervix is not just like a little doorway between the vagina and the uterus. It's actually an organ in its own right. And it has what's called cervical crypts. And cervical crypts are just little pits where the sperm can sort of lurk around for about as long as they live, which is a few days. Maybe absolute maximum a week, but they very rarely live a week. That's like a person living to be like 110 or something. They generally live sort of 4 days or so. And they'll be living in the cervical crypts, and it just sort of staggers their entrance into the uterus. So that, if a woman had sex on the Tuesday, the sperm just sort of shot through a uterus, down the fallopian tubes and just wiggling around in her body somewhere. When the egg appeared on Thursday, then, there's less chance of it being fertilised than if, a few sperm were just swimming up all the time between Tuesday and Saturday. So yes, that's what sperm do. They just swim around, and when they reach the egg, they just burrow into it. And the egg has a sort of permeable outer membrane. And the sperm are so tiny that, one little sperm, it comes wiggling along and starts to nibble. It takes a while. Sometimes several sperms start burrowing in at the same time. Anyway, only one will get in, and then the outside of the egg becomes hard, so that no more sperm can find their way in. And at that moment, the moment one sperm reaches the middle of the egg, fuses, its cell nucleus with the cell nucleus of the egg, that's it, it is fertilised. Everything genetic is decided. Your physical sex is decided. If you have any sort of, genetic predispositions to anything, that's set in stone. Your hair colour, your eye colour, your skin colour, everything is there. Also, you have things like Down syndrome, that are caused by, chromosome issues. And as I say, the egg then continues its journey, gradually growing. What have I missed? Pregnancy hormones. As I say, the corpus luteum starts producing, the hormones that carry the pregnancy. And then the placenta takes over as it grows and gets established, which can take a few months. It can take 2-3 months. Produce progesterone and estrogen. As I've said before, progesterone, it peaks after ovulation and then fades away if you are not pregnant. If you're not, it continues to rise and rise and rise throughout the whole of the pregnancy. And it just keeps the uterus, keeps the blood flow coming to it, keeps it growing. Estrogen, again, does a similar sort of thing, it lets the uterus grow throughout pregnancy, establish, keeps the placenta functioning, etc. Prolactin is one that starts to be produced maybe halfway through the pregnancy and then more so towards the end. That's what produces milk. That stimulates the milk glands. But the progesterone will stop the milk glands producing milk. They'll just develop, and be ready to get going when the baby is born. In the last week of pregnancy, the progesterone and the estrogen drop off, and at that moment, birth begins, the birth process, which is nothing at all like TV likes to depict it. There are many things that start happening that can happen at any time over a week or two. There's what's called slow labour, when you start getting contractions, but then they're so far apart and they develop so slowly that it can take several days, even weeks, to really, be anything to worry about particularly. Sometimes the waters break long before the contractions begin. This is what happened to me with my son. The contractions did not start after my waters broke. And when the waters, you see it in films, there's just a big gush it's not, it starts to gradually leak. You know, you look down and think, oh, what's going on there? Oh, I've peed myself, I've sat in something, what's going on? And then it just keeps coming and coming and coming until you've actually finished giving birth. There's also 2 sets of waters. There's forewaters and hindwaters. My forewaters broke, but my hindwaters did not. So I had to go through the process of having the hindwaters broken for me, which involves a hook on a stick. Yes. What happens if you're in the situation I was in? You have to be induced 24 hours, within 24 hours of your waters breaking, because there's a risk of infection otherwise. Induction is a series of increasingly painful and unpleasant procedures that can take a couple of days. The idea is that the midwives will just try anything within their power to get you into labour. I mean, you can sort of start off yourself. There's some kind of old wives' tales, if you like, about, sort of bouncing up and down and things all start labour off. Maybe for some people they work. They're not medically sound. What they start with is a pessary, which means they push a tablet up your vagina into your cervix, with the intention of starting off with contractions. That doesn't always work. As I say, then move on to breaking the waters. They sometimes recommend you do things like sitting in a hot bath or walking about and stuff like that, just to sort of try and get this baby coming. I actually can't remember the whole list of things that happened to me that day. I was taking a lot of painkillers, I've got to say. It's all a bit of a blur. I went into hospital about 10 o'clock in the morning of the 27th. Midnight, they said I was, in inactive labour. That means there are contractions that are, worth doing something about. I was taken to the delivery room, and it was 9:15 on the 28th when my son was born. It's not a quick process. I've known people say they were in active labour for several days. Again, it does vary from person to person. At any moment, anything could happen, really. It's having a baby is quite a big medical procedure. It's a very large object that has to come out of your body. There's danger of hemorrhaging, especially if the placenta comes out, because it's connected to your blood supply. There's risk of tearing yourself internally. There's a risk that the baby might get stuck. If you happen to have a smallish pelvis and the baby has a biggish head, sometimes it just will not come through. And, at that point, there's just nothing they can do except do a caesarean. You can really see why so many women and babies died giving birth before going into hospital was the done thing. So yes, there are various methods of getting the baby out as well if it's getting a bit stuck. There's forceps, which is like a big pair of tongs that they put around the baby's head and give it a pull. There's a ventouse, which is a sort of vacuum that they use to pull the baby out. I mean, all these things are not ideal. They're very painful for the mother. They, again, are another risk of damage to the baby. But all of them are, better options than just leaving the mother struggling by herself, when she's absolutely exhausted, in absolute agony. And there are various pain relief methods available. There are, gas and air is always the first one they use, and they put a little mask over you and just tell you to breathe in. That's helpful when the contractions start, but after a while it just doesn't do anything, really. And there's sort of various painkillers that you can be given, various drugs. And generally the last option is epidural. I've known some people go straight for the epidural, which I wouldn't. I'm just squeamish about it somehow. Having an injection into your spine. Apparently, it does sometimes make labour take longer because you can't feel what's going on. You can't push as hard. But yes, they will get that baby out somehow. You've just got to kind of trust your midwife and hope that they know what they're doing. Luckily, my midwives all managed to get my baby out of me without causing either of us any permanent damage. Anyway, human chorionic gonadotropin. Talk about that briefly, because that's the hormone that's picked up by pregnancy tests. It's produced in the first trimester of pregnancy. That's the first 3 months. And it's just to stop your body rejecting the fetus, the embryo in the first trimester. Stops your body just expelling it. And when you take a pregnancy test, that's generally 2 weeks after ovulation, which is, if you have an average 28-day cycle, that will be the day that you're expecting your period to start. So they're really only useful if your period is late and you're thinking, what's going on here, or if you have a much longer cycle. Because by the time 2 weeks have elapsed, you will be producing enough human chorionic gonadotropin, HCG, to show up on the test. And the little purple line that appears, well, sometimes it's purple, sometimes it's blue, depends on the make of the test. It is just a reaction. It's a little chemical put on the test strip that changes colour when it's in contact with the HCG. And it does rise very quickly. So if you keep taking a test every day, you'll get a very faint line first of all. Both times I've been pregnant, I've had a very faint line at 12 days after ovulation. So that's 1 week and 5 days. But they're only really guaranteed from 2 weeks after. You don't necessarily see everything at 12 days. And then if you keep on taking one every day, you'll see the line getting darker and darker. So if you sort of think you see something but you don't know, it's just wishful thinking, or if you take the test early, take it a couple of days afterwards again and see if anything has developed. Yes, and that's just a hormone unique to the first trimester, really. After that, it dies away. And it sort of allows the placenta to get established without being rejected by the body. And then the placenta, it's making its own hormones by then, so it's not it's no longer needed, particularly. And yes, that is what shows up on your pregnancy test. Again, all these things, all these hormones, they are organic substances. They come and go in your body. Nobody is the same. Not even one cycle will be identical to every other, you know. These are all estimates based on averages. You could at any point in your cycle ovulate. You could technically get pregnant pretty much any time. Anytime you know, a woman has sex with a man, she could possibly get pregnant. Now, I mean, things like, you know, contraception drastically reduces the chances, but never eliminates it completely. You know, there's just so many, you know, examples of, you know, failed contraception. Even things like hormonal implants and things are not absolutely 100% foolproof. You know, hormones fluctuate, bodies do their own thing to some extent. You know, it can be affected by so many different factors. And you know, the menstrual cycle will just carry on until a woman is pregnant, or sometimes it stops because she's ill. You know, she is on hormonal contraception and it just throws out her periods altogether and they stop. And each time they stop and then they come back again, you know, she comes off contraception if she is no longer ill, she gives birth, then they will start again from the beginning, you know, from day one, which is the blood. The blood starts, the blood stops, the estrogen rises, the follicle releases the egg moves down into the uterus, may or may not be fertilised, and then the uterus thickens its lining and it releases the lining and the cycle starts. Yeah. And that'll go on until the menopause. There's a state called perimenopause, which goes on for a year or so. Generally when a woman's in her late 40s, but it can be anywhere from, you know, 30s to 50s. And that means the hormones do not peak like they used to. Quite often the ovules coming out are not, you know, genetically complete. Quite often the cycle sort of goes into disarray. She might miss a period and then have to the next month or anything like that. She might start releasing more eggs or less eggs, or, you know, having a period and then not releasing an egg at all. And that can go on for a couple of years until, you know, the cycle just stops altogether. And that is known as the menopause. When it's defined as when a woman has not had a period for a whole year. She has left perimenopause and entered menopause. And then there are sort of medical interventions. I mean, a woman can still carry a pregnancy, but it's always going to be high risk. She's always going to need, you know, hormone injections and, you know, constant monitoring. But it can be done at pretty much any age now. It is possible. Male fertility is supposed to decline with age, but again, you know, every man is different. There's so many factors that can affect it. There's just no way of forecasting, you know, what any individual man will be able to do at what age. Yes, that is, I think, all I have to say on the subject of fertility and the menstrual cycle. And yeah, I'm in the 35th minute again now, so I'll have to leave it there. try and keep them to half an hour just for watchability purposes. But anyway, thanks for listening. If you did listen, this makes it all worthwhile when people listen. And I will see you in the next one.